You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Welcome back to Bookstorm Podcast, listeners. I'm your co-host, Kristen Civiletto, and we're just thrilled that you're tuning in from 105 countries and territories in all 50 states. And we know why. It is because we're bringing you the very best authors that are writing today. And today is no exception. We are so excited because we are welcoming the legendary New York Times bestselling author, JA Jance. Welcome, JA.
I'm legendary because I'm 80 years old. I've been writing for 40 years.
You're legendary because you have written three beloved characters that have become a part of literary culture. That is rare to have one, let alone three. And I want to show the cover of the book that we're actually talking about today because it features one of those characters coming back. We're talking about the girl from Devil's Lake, and I want to show this beautiful, intriguing cover. I love it.
That's actually one of my favorite covers because if you look at the title in one light, it looks like it's white. And if you look at it in another light, it's actually silver, just like water is in sunlight.
It does. It shifts. You're exactly right. That's really cool. Well, in this story, I want to make sure this is correct. Is this your 21st Joanna Brady novel?
I'm sorry, I've lost count because the joint books sort of count as a half.
Yes.
But I think it's number 20.
Okay. And I want to explain that to our listeners. First of all, one of the favorite characters for many, many years is Arizona County Sheriff Joanna Brady. And that's what this novel is about. But you have these other popular series that have some crossover in a couple books. So we've got retired Seattle Police Department Detective J.P. Beaumont. And we also have former Los Angeles news anchor turned mystery solver, Allie Reynolds. And some of your books then feature all three, or two of these characters at least, correct?
Yes, Bo sort of sneaks into various characters around. Bo came to me on a train. I was going from Seattle to Portland on a train. My kids were at spring break at camp, and I had been trying to write a book for 6 months, and it just wouldn't start. But I got on the train, fortunately, with pens and paper. And as the train was pulling out of the station, I thought, well, what would happen if I wrote this book through the detective's point of view? So I got out a pen and I wrote, "She might have been a cute kid once. That was hard to tell now. She was dead." Oh! And as soon as I wrote those words, I was walking around a crime scene on the back of Seattle's Magnolia Bluff. I was seeing what he saw. I was hearing what he heard. I was hearing what he said, but I was also hearing what he thought. And Bo and I have been author and character for more than 40 years now.
Wow.
And so my first husband died of chronic alcoholism a year and a half after I divorced him. So I spent 18 years with a man who was a problem drinker. I wasn't allowed in the creative writing program at the University of Arizona in 1962 because, as the professor told me, "You're a girl." Yeah, you're right, I am.
Yeah.
So when it came time to write about Beaumont, I knew enough to write what I know, and I knew a lot about drinking. So Bo did the kind of drinking that I had lived with for all those years. And 4 books in, my readers started pointing out that J.P. Beaumont had a problem. and they were right. So in book 8, he finally goes into rehab, and I'm working on Beaumont number 27 now. So he's been in recovery a lot longer than he was drinking. But for a long time, I wrote nine Beaumont books, and I was tired of him. I needed a break. So they had me write the first Walker book, Hour of the Hunter, in which, coincidentally, a former professor of creative writing from the University of Arizona is a crazed killer. Got that guy.
Right.
And
No
then
coincidence.
I said, well, why don't you come up with somebody else so you can sort of alternate? Because when I went back to writing about Bo, it was fun again.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, writing a male point of view in first person is hard. Writing a male point of view is hard. Writing in a place I've lived in for just a few years is hard. So I pressed the easy button and I chose Joanna Brady to be the main character. I put her in Bisbee, Arizona, where I grew up, and I wrote her in third person.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, I had what my editor called me and said, you have two sets of readers. You have the readers that read the Beaumont books, and you have the readers who read the Joanna Brady books. Is there a way you can bring them together? And that's when I wrote the first crossover book, Partner in Crime, where Beaumont ends up going to Bisbee, Arizona. But when I started writing that, it was important to have him be the way he always was. So his part of the book is written in the first person, and Joanna's is written in the third person.
Yeah. I love that. Well, you had mentioned something a second ago before we talked specifically about this one about not being allowed into a creative writing program. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I wanted to be a writer from the time I was in second grade, and I signed up to be an English major. Part of the time I worked in the English department to earn my way through school. And when I told the professor I was going to sign up for his class, he wouldn't let me in. So I married a guy who was allowed in his class. He got a good grade. Guess who edited his book, his papers? But in 1970, my first husband and I were teaching on the reservation west of Tucson. We lived 30 miles west of Tucson near Three Points. We taught 60 miles west of Tucson near in Sells. And on the 22nd of May, because I had to decorate for the prom after school, and because we were having company at home, my husband left school when school got out and hitchhiked home so I could drive the car. And later on that evening, when I got out of school, when I finished decorating, the Law and Order was full of cop cars. And I wondered about that, but I didn't. When I left school, Law and Order was full of cop cars, and I wondered about it, but I knew nobody would be stopping me if I broke the speed limit going home, so I did. Going into town that night to have dinner with the company, we were stopped at a roadblock, and we said, what's going on? Oh, the cop said there was a homicide on the reservation. We said, Indian or Anglo? He said, Anglo. We said, well, good, it's nobody we know then. But when we stopped at the trading post to get gas while my husband was pumping the gas, I overheard the deputy, say something about a man in a green car and something about two little kids. And so I reported that conversation as we started toward Tucson. And a couple miles later, my husband said, a man in a green car. I wonder if that's the guy who gave me a ride home this afternoon. And it turned out it was.
Oh, goodness.
The chief homicide detective was at our door at 6 o'clock the next morning. We didn't have a phone. We lived 7 miles to the nearest neighbor and or telephone. And he told us that the previous afternoon, A 28-year-old woman had been forced off the highway at gunpoint, shot, raped in front of her two small children, and left to die. Indians coming home from work spotted these two little Anglo kids walking on the highway at the end of May in the middle of nowhere, and they stopped and they said, "What are you doing?" And the little boy said, "We're walking on the beach." They were actually headed toward Rocky Point in Mexico. And they said, "Well, where's your mommy?" And he said, "She's over there. She's dead." He was 4.
Oh my
She wasn't dead
goodness.
when the Indians got there, but she died before they could get her to the hospital. My husband provided information from things inside the car that helped them identify the killer. He was able to provide information about the car itself. And the detective knew within minutes um, who they identified him, but I didn't know then. There were no true crime TV shows then.
Yeah.
I didn't know that arresting is just the beginning. You have to build the case. Jack Lyons figured out early on that he was dealing with a serial killer.
Wow.
Killed people at 20 minutes after 2 on the 22nd day of the month. The woman on the reservation was his third victim. He shot a 42-year-old man off a bulldozer, a 16-year-old girl off a bicycle, and the woman on the way to Rocky Point in her car. The incidents were getting closer together. The cop picked him up. I spent a lot of time that summer, 40 days of that summer, on the Hill by myself, because during the summer my husband worked construction and I had a 12-month contract in the library. And so I was on the Hill by myself. I wore a loaded weapon. I actually fired it once. I fired all 6 shots at a rapidly retreating rattlesnake who was still laughing as it went up over the wall and disappeared. But I figured if the killer showed up, he'd be a larger target, and I
Yeah.
waited.
Yeah.
On the 20th of July, Jack Lyons took my husband to San Manuel, identified the killer as he came off shift. And so my husband rode in the car with Jack Lyons and the killer from San Manuel to Tucson. And during that time, he admitted to having been at our house on 3 different occasions in the intervening 60 days. We had been scheduled to be July 22nd.
Oh my goodness.
So years later, when I did a Dale Carnegie course and had to give a talk about something that changed my life,
Yeah.
I gave a talk about that.
Yeah.
Because if you can defend yourself in the face of a very real danger, we had a well with a rope pull pump. If you can get your own water in the desert, you gain a measure of independence that no amount of broad burning can ever duplicate. And that investigation was sort of the foundation of where I started writing. The first book I ever wrote was based on that case. It was never published, and I'm so grateful. I submitted it. Everybody turned it down, including the editor who finally bought the first Beaumont book. 9 books in, when I threatened to knock Beau off, he said, "Well, you remember that book you wrote the first time?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "How about if you rewrite that and we'll change it and we'll make that be your first hardback," which it is, Hour of the Hunter. But they gave me a contract. I signed it. They gave me a check. I spent it. And then they gave me a deadline. The problem was the killer was still in prison in Arizona. And although my husband, the witness, was no longer extant, I didn't want to write a book that would bring his attention to me. So I didn't have I had to write a book, but I had no bad guy.
Yeah.
I had such a serious case of writer's block that year when my University of Arizona Alumni magazine came, I read the whole thing from cover to cover.
Oh,
And
oh,
at the very end, just before the obituaries, was this little blocked article that said, the newly reconstituted creative writing program at the university was doing just fine. And I turned to Bill, my second husband, the good one, and I said, I've got all of these books. Maybe the U of A would like me to come from Seattle to Tucson and be writer in residence for a semester in the sun. He said, call him up, ask him. So I did. Got the number from information, called him up, explained who I was and when I graduated and when I did. And he said to me, and this is a direct quote, oh, we don't do anything with genre fiction here. We only do literary fiction. Huh. It was a miracle. I was healed of writer's block on the spot. And the crazed killer became a former professor of creative writing from the
right. You hit a villain.
So that's so in a very real way, that unpublished book and that experience were sort of the foundation that I built my writing career on. But back to Joanna, I write, when I wrote the first Beaumont book and found out it was going to be a series, I didn't want to write a series where a character was stuck in one year or one era, or I wanted to have them age the way real people do. So the first time I wrote the first Joanna Brady book, Desert Heat, in the late 80s. And she was 28 years old. She was in the first scene, excuse me. In the first scene, we meet Joanna Brady sitting in her house with her mother, Eleanor. Eleanor is a character. Joanna is 28 years old. She's married and waiting for her husband to come home so they can celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. And her 9-year-old daughter, Jenny. Jenny has had a tiny bit of sex ed at Greenway School in Bisbee, and she has counted on her fingers. And you know what? There aren't enough months between her parents' anniversary and her birthday. So she asks her mom, was I a preemie? Sort of like lobbing a hand grenade into the conversation, because of course she wasn't a preemie. The wedding was what was late. And Joanna's mother has been on a tear about that for all the years in between. So that's when we first meet Joanna and Jenny. The reason her husband is late is he's been shot to death by a hitman coming home from work, but that's that's another story. So now when we meet Joanna Brady in the girl from Devil's Lake, she is on her way to Phoenix, where she is going to speak at Jenny's graduation from the same police academy that Joanna herself attended. So Jenny has gone from a 9-year-old to a college graduate and now a newly sworn deputy over the course of these books. And so people feel as though my characters are real people, and they feel kind of real to me too. And that's been one of the joys of writing these long running series. It's really rewarding for me to get to know the characters. In one of my Allie Reynolds books, Allie's father is starting down the road toward Alzheimer's. And he still has sometimes when he's not in the fog, and sometimes when he has no idea who people are. And he takes his life literally in his own hand, walks out of the care facility into the path of a moving vehicle and is gone. And that scene affected me when I wrote it, and it affected my readers when they read it. I think, yes, the mysteries are there. And in this book, there is certainly a mystery, but I think it's the characters behind the characters. In The Girl from Devil's Lake, it starts in fertile Minnesota in 1956. And Joanna Brady readers are saying, wait a minute, this is supposed to be Southern Arizona, isn't it?
Right, right.
But this is you meet a very troubled 11-year-old who despises his step grandmother and murders her in the prologue by putting a fishing line across the top step of their porch and then telling her, a raccoon's after your cat in the barn, and she comes running out and falls flat on the sidewalk. And the cop who answered that felt like there was something wrong, but everybody else said, "Oh, he's just an 11-year-old kid. He couldn't do this." But that is the beginning of Stephen Roper's path for
Yeah,
becoming a serial killer. He got away with it the first time, and he he is he's sort of an evil kid to begin with,
yeah,
and and the only thing that finally stops him is running into Joanna Brady.
yeah,
You watch him grow into a true serial killer, leaving a trail of dead bodies from one end of the country to the other. And it's Joanna Brady's small department with their very limited resources who finally bring him to ground.
yeah. And as we see in the story too, she quickly realizes that this is no ordinary case. We have a killer who has killed before, and we've got potentially some answers to killings or missing persons in different spots throughout the country.
And in this case, he was given a cigar box by his grandfather. He loved his grandfather. He hated his grandfather's wife, but he loved his grandfather, and his grandfather gave him a cigar box. And that becomes when he steals his grandmother's ring off her dead finger. That's the first thing he puts in his cigar box. And so his cigar box is his trophy case.
Yes.
And in a very real way, that's what serial killers do. They have trophies of some kind that allow them in their evil existence to relive those various things. They know each one of their victims. They refer to them by some pet name, but the pet name is related to that trophy.
Yeah. And in fact, we see where our killer here would take them out from time to time to relive those experiences.
Yes, yes, he
Yeah.
does.
Well, let me ask you this then, because you raise so many interesting themes throughout the story, that I wanted to ask you about one particular one that jumped out at me. Joanna has been in law enforcement for a long time, and she has seen changes both in law enforcement officer training as well as in the criminal element. And she notes at one point that it used to be the jails might have been full of, the town drunks. She's talking about a smaller town jail, and, maybe some nonviolent offenders. But now it's a whole different story. Now we've got violent offenders, members of gangs, members of cartels. So I
Disney,
wanted to ask you about that because these
Disney,
shifts are significant.
the shifts are significant in I think it was book number 2, or no, it was book number 3 when she was away at the academy. She had to go to the police academy after she was already elected sheriff
Yes.
because her husband was running for sheriff when he was killed, and she was elected as sort of a sympathy vote. And in the second book, Tombstone Courage, she makes a serious error by not waiting for backup. And that's one of the 10 fatal, Tombstone Courage, not waiting for backup, is one of the 10 fatal errors that police officers make. And so people reading the book probably thought it was because Tombstone, Arizona is 25 miles from Bisbee, but Tombstone, Arizona had nothing to do with that book. But Bisbee is 7 miles from the Mexican border. And if the damage that illegal border crossers have done to ranch lands, to the landscape, to people living there is just appalling. And so in the third book, there's a woman whose husband always walked in and just threw his clothes on the floor. And so she finally gets tired of it. Instead of putting him in the hamper, he puts them on the floor. She went through the house and actually nailed them to the floor. And she ends up in jail as a result of the confrontation that happens after that. But somebody has just stolen all of the jail's Thanksgiving turkeys. And so she was the chef in a restaurant. So Joanna, she's incarcerated, Joanna drafts her to be the new cook, because the cook was what the former cook was, who had stolen the turkeys. So it was sort of, at that point, it was sort of easy come, easy go. And if my sister lived right on the border, and somebody stole her saddle, and so the sheriff went across the border and talked to the federales down there, and they got the saddle back. There was no big international incident, but the one year, the 1 year that I know of, and it was before this last onslaught, there were 280,000 illegal border crossers that came through Cochise County, Joanna's jurisdiction, and she has a total police force of 90 people.
Wow.
So the impact on those border towns is far beyond what anybody thinks in the rest of the world. They don't notice it. And the impact on the jail has been incredible.
Yeah. And some of these crimes are that much more complex as well. And, I wanted to kind of ask you that too, because you did dive into this theme of technology. We had some murders that took place decades ago, but now technology is catching up and we're solving crimes from decades before, something that your serial killer in the story was worried about.
Well,
So,
he's been very careful
mhm,
since very early on in his career,
yeah,
but he wasn't quite careful enough.
yeah,
But it's the cigar box of trophies that gives an indication of exactly how many victims there have been over the years while he's been posing as a school teacher in Bisbee, Arizona, and
yeah,
killing people during summer vacation. So once they begin to see the similarity in the crimes, Joanna figures out that those trophies may be the key to answering some of the questions, because I watch a lot of true crime. My husband watches the Network and Home and Garden TV. After he goes to bed at night, I watch Blood and Guts TV. And the victims don't get over it.
yeah.
the cops that have unsolved cases on their books don't get over it.
Yeah.
And by reaching out to those people is what finally brings the case together.
Yeah. And the role of technology is interesting because it's a blessing in some respects in terms of solving these crimes, but it might also be helping criminals be that much more sophisticated.
Well, yes, when I started writing the Beaumont books in the early 80s, the only you had fingerprints.
Yeah.
The only comparison was to fingerprints in that police department, the cards in that police department. You didn't have any access to fingerprints from 20 or 30 miles away even.
Yeah.
And blood typing. And blood typing could rule out possible suspects, but it didn't identify suspects. So I I've been fascinated to watch the growth of forensic genealogy, for instance, and see how that can be applied to even current cases, as it was in the case of the Idaho murders.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Well,
the next Ellie Reynolds book it is called Smoke and Mirrors, and it's electronic footprints. Those Bo was called screaming and kicking into the computer age. Somebody wrote to me once and said, "Well, why is it? Why is Beaumont always looking for a quarter and a payphone? Why doesn't he just use his cell?" And I said, "Look at the publication date." Because cell phones had been invented. Actually, my second husband, Bill, was worked for Motorola, and he was on the team that built the first gray brick telephone in 1968, but those didn't go on sale until 1986.
wow.
So there there was no such thing as a cell phone back then as far as the public was concerned.
Sure. Interesting. Well, I have a last question for you if you have a moment. I know we're keeping you a long time because I love talking to you about the underlying currents in your stories because they're very complex. But you did broach another subject that I thought was fascinating, and that is these mental health concerns. We had a serial killer where there was a serious break of some kind. We don't know exactly what led him to having some mental health concerns. But I wanted to ask you if you thought that we as a society are even equipped to deal with these kinds of challenges in our young people.
Well, as the mother of a mentally troubled son, I he has threatened me, but
Yeah.
on until he does something, there's nothing to be done.
Yeah.
And so I there's no way for I don't think society really has begun to come to terms with this issue. Uh, a program I watched last night was about a woman who had a protection order. Those are just pieces of paper, and
Yes.
all the pieces of paper do is to enrage the off-kilter person even more. And
Yes.
so she had reported those breaches of the protection order to the cops twice. They did nothing, and eventually she was murdered.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's something that is really personally troubling to me too.
Yeah. I don't know that the court system is equipped to deal with, first of all, families, but also these mental health challenges and concerns that we're increasingly seeing. And I agree with you. For example, putting somebody in jail or restraining them, that's not getting to the root of the issue. And so I saw you raising these concerns throughout the story. And again, as always, your stories are very complex and you've got to unravel a lot as you're reading through it. Also thoroughly entertaining. Let me add that. But I really appreciate the fact that there are nuanced issues that you are challenging the reader to think about.
Well, I don't I don't regard myself as a novelist. I regard myself as a storyteller.
Yeah.
And the ancient sacred charge of the storyteller is to beguile the time. And although I've been on the New York Times list many times over the years, the praise that makes the most sense to me is when someone tells me that my books have kept them company in hospital waiting rooms,
Yeah.
in hospital rooms when they've been hospitalized or when they've been recovering from knee replacement surgery. That's those are the ones that really count for me.
Yeah, I love that. Well, your books are engrossing, but we're also part of the family. We know your characters. We've watched them as they find a new love, for example. And I'm not going to give anything away in the story, but I think that's maybe one of the reasons why. I love that. Thank you. Well, you did allude to something coming down the pipe, and I hate to talk about future things because I know you should be basking in the glory of this one. But did you say there's another book coming out in your Beaumont series?
Actually, the next Alley book
Oh, okay.
is written. It's called Smoke and Mirrors. It's in New York right now. I'll probably get the editorial letter on that within the next couple of weeks.
Excellent.
It's the the last Allie book, Overkill, was fun because it starts with Allie receiving a phone call from her first, her current husband's first wife, who is in jail, suspected of murdering her husband, who was once B. Simpson, Allie's husband's best friend and partner. So B doesn't want to have anything to do with this mess. But of course, Allie, who is incapable of minding her own business, can't help but get involved. In this case, a woman from her past, someone she knew back before she was evicted from the newsroom. By the way, Allie got it by the early 2000s. I was tired of everybody. I'd been alternating Beaumont, Brady, and um, and Joanna, Beaumont, Brady, and the Walkers, and I was just tired of them. So I complained to my editor. She said, "Okay, just write a book. It can be any character, new character, old character, set it wherever you like, and we'll have it here by the 1st of January, and we'll publish it as an original paperback." Well, it was May. I can write a book in 6 months. So I said, okay, sent me the contract, signed it, sent me the check, I spent it. Once again, here I was. Deadline, no character. So June passed, July and August passed, September passed. Suddenly it was
Oh,
the middle of October. Still had no idea
oh
who
my
would be
goodness.
in this book. It had to be in in New York by the 1st of January. So at that point, whenever I was dealing with writer's block, I would watch the news compulsively. So we were in Tucson, and on a Thursday in October, I watched the noon news with my favorite newscaster, Patty Weiss. And then 5 o'clock came around. I was still suffering from writer's block. Went to watch the news, and Patty Weiss was MIA. She wasn't on vacation. She wasn't on assignment. She just was gone. Over the weekend, other news outlets gave gave out the news that between the noon news and the 5 o'clock news, Patty's brand new, very youthful news director came to her and told her that at age 53, she was too old for TV and escorted her out of the building. Now, it's a bad idea to make mystery writers mad. And so by the middle of the following week, I was writing about Allie Reynolds being kicked out of the newsroom for being too old. So this book harkens back to that and to some unsolved murders still lingering
I
from
see.
those early days. And I've launched off on the next Beaumont book. It's currently called Fool's Errand. I don't know if that will show up, but a very interesting character from Beau's past, Twinkle Winkleman, shows up in this book.
Interesting. Well, I can't wait for this book, but I'm so excited for you. You've got so many exciting things coming down the pipe. I'm going to show our listeners this beautiful cover one more time. And to me, The Girl from Devil's Lake was a wonderful, thrilling read. This is a worthy addition to your entire franchise here. I'm very excited for you. And we hope you come back in the future. I want to tell our listeners how to get in touch with you. You have a beautiful website, jajance.com. You have a blog, and it sounds like you do respond to readers who email you. So if they have some thoughts they would love to share, you encourage that. And
My
thank you.
blog,
Thank you.
when I was in college, my mother, even though she still had 4 kids left at home, would sit down every Tuesday morning and write me a letter, which would be in my dorm mailbox on Friday mornings. And those kept me up to date with what was going on at home. And my blog, that's why it publishes on Friday mornings. And it,
Ah,
instead of letters from home, it offers readers a window on my writer's world every week.
yeah. Yeah. And a little bit of your family and some of your stories. You're a very inspiring person all around. And in fact, I want to tell our listeners, you support many causes, including cancer research, raising money personally, and encouraging others. So I'm just so excited to have met you and talk about this fantastic book. And again, I'm just so thankful you came on the show.
Well, I am too. And tell your daughter I'm sorry I missed her.
I absolutely will. She was so sorry to miss you.
Well, she has a job to do.
That's right. Well, you take care, and I will look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, what a fantastic discussion with JA Jance. She is just so humble and personal and transparent. And you can see all the things that inform her amazing writing and characters. These beloved characters have been with us for decades, and we want more. So we are just so grateful to talk with her today. And what an absolute joy. The Girl from Devil's Lake. It'll keep you turning those pages. There is no doubt. I'm going to tell you about some of our other authors that are coming up. We have Brooke Fast with To Cage a Wild Bird, Alma Katsu with Fiend, Gareth Brown, The Society of Unknowable Objects, Mary Alice Monroe, Where the Rivers Merge, Daniel Silva, An Inside Job, Don Winslow, The Final Score, Lou Burney, Crooks, A Family Portrait, Christina Baker Klein and Ann Burt with Please Don't Lie, Isabella Maldonado and Jeffrey Deaver with The Grave Artist. And listeners, we're growing every week. We continue to ask you to share our socials. We're so grateful. You know where to find us, bookstormpodcast.com, Instagram, we're on X, we're on YouTube, where you can see these fantastic authors. And you know why you're coming back again and again? It's because your favorite authors are here on Bookstorm Podcast.